Hello and welcome back to Culture in Action. I'm Luke Fisher, the CEO of Mo. Today, I'm joined by Charlotte Graham. She's the People and Change Lead at Ocado Retail. She has a wonderful background across IT and people change projects. Ocado is a household name for us here in the UK, one of the largest dedicated online supermarkets. Charlotte shares how Ocado's culture is defined by high support and high challenge, and what it really looks like to bring these values to life across a fast-moving digital-first business. We also talk about how recognition keeps people feeling connected and seen, especially during times of fast-paced change, and how to make a culture something that people feel and not just read about in the internal communications. Let's jump in. I'm here with Charlotte. I'm really excited to talk to you because I think your background fits perfectly with where the future of work might be going at the moment. So I know a little bit about you, but people listening won't know anything. So do you mind just starting with who you are and a little bit about you, please?
It's exciting that my background fits perfectly with the future of work. I like to hear that.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, my name's Charlotte. I'm from New Zealand, actually. I moved to London about 5 years ago now. And my background really from a work point of view is change management. So in New Zealand, I worked in the insurance industry, working on change within operational teams and contact centres. And then when I moved over to London, I continued doing change management, but it's more in the IT space. So when I first started at Ocado Retail, I was in a business change manager role, so working on IT initiatives, supporting the people side of those IT initiatives, and then through that sort of transitioned into our HR team, people team, where my role is people and change lead. And within that, I still focus on change initiatives, the people side of people change initiatives, but I also look after internal comms and some engagement stuff like Mo and actually our engagement platform. So it's a kind of a blend of culture and change.
Okay, good. This is good because we're also going to dive in now to culture and what it means for your organization and changing it. So uh, one of the big things at the minute, and we talked about your career history having change as the constant, but organizations face this all of the time, right? It almost feels a bit gimmicky to say it now, but the pace of change is pretty rapid and there's a lot of factors that influence it at the minute. It'd be really nice to just start with like, how do you define the kind of culture that you want to build out at Ocado Retail?
Yeah. We are a really values-led organization, and I think that's really helpful in defining the culture because obviously you can use your values to help set the landscape for the culture that you want to have. And our values not only just drive the work that we do, but the behaviors and the mindsets and things that people need to have in order to achieve really great results. So when you're kind of looking at the culture that you want to build or that we wanted to build, it's really through the lens of those values and our strategic goals, and obviously linking them so that we can deliver great results. But having the values as the principles that guide your decision making and your ways of working, for us, that's really helped us to enable us to build the culture that we have within the business. And we try to bring our values to life through loads of different ways. One of them is actually through our recognition program. So when we do recognition or celebrate colleague success, we look at not only what they do, so how they're delivering objectives, the stuff that they're doing, but we also look at how they're doing that too, and that's through our values. So are they displaying the behaviors and living our values, which kind of drives the culture? And so we, as much as possible, just kind of bring those through. And I would say that's the most important thing for us that we lean on because it's just such a useful tool, or just, I guess, framework that we can
Yeah,
manage
yeah.
change.
Got it. So values are often quite an abstract concept to an employee, and therefore they can tie to what is an example of one of your values?
Challenge what's possible.
Okay, so challenge what possible, I guess people can understand in sentiment, but in practice, like how does that actually play through? Like, how do you help them understand? Is what we mean by that? Like, you define the art of the possible. We want you to challenge leaders. We want you to share ideas. How do you set out the expectation to employees so they know what good looks like, I guess?
Yeah, we do it in a couple of different ways. One of the things we're working on at the moment is with our leadership population and looking at leadership behaviors. And so those are all very much linked to our values. So if you are challenging what's possible, what does it actually look like and how do you lead your team through that? So a lot of that is focused on actually not necessarily everyone, but the leadership population and how they can actually work with teams to bring those values to life. But then we actually just, in the least cheesy way possible, try and bring the values to life through all of our comms and just different subtle ways that we talk about how we do things here. So if we're doing some communication about a change or said again through recognition and stuff, it's always, okay, well, this is a really great example of challenging what's possible, or this person's challenged what's possible to achieve these types of things, or we would need to really lean in here and challenge what's possible. So I think there's a mixture of things, but bringing it into the language and giving real life examples of like where we're actually doing that is a really useful way for us to do that.
Yeah, so a continuous positive reinforcement in both comms and in recognition activity and spotlighting, and creating the association of this story equals this type of value. And therefore you can start to see, it's like if you read enough stuff, you start to be able to understand the core concepts and the ways of working right around a particular topic.
Yeah. I think as well, you could even, like, when you're talking about objectives and delivering results, that you can be achieving or delivering amazing results, but if you're not doing that in a way that's like aligns to our culture, that maybe doesn't fit for us either. So it's also a tool that we can use when we're having performance conversations as well, to say, how are you bringing yourself to the table when you're at work? And is it in a positive way that aligns to who we are as a business? That's another way that we can do it as well.
Yeah, okay, got it. And I want us to just imagine a world where that we see quite a lot of different triggers to change. Might be a new CEO, it might be new investors, it might be a business problem that's identified, I don't know, high employee turnover, or your engagement survey comes back and says that there's a really poor result that you've received in a certain area. And then you say, okay, now this is important. We want to drive change here. And you then kick off a work stream. And then you're in the zone when you're like, okay, we've got a gazillion things that we could do here. So how do we think about prioritizing? What do we focus on? Why we're focusing there? Do you have a playbook for change now that you've accrued over the years?
I don't know necessarily if it's a playbook, but I think it's actually, you never want to do things that are so far out there that aren't going to keep in line with the rest of the organization. So the most important thing, I think, is actually making sure that what you're doing is connecting to what the organization is trying to achieve. And we have to think about the culture that we're trying to deliver in order for us to achieve those strategic goals. So I guess from a people team point of view, it's what are the things that we're going to do to help the overall employee experience so that we enable people to achieve those great results and deliver our strategy. And so I guess that is probably the first thing that we look at when we look like prioritizing what work we're going to be doing. But then we are a support function as well. So we are here to support the wider business. And so we can't prioritize or make decisions without their input as well. So obviously we're out thinking about what work we can deliver or what projects we can deliver to build on our strategic pillars. But also we're talking to our stakeholders to say what's the priority for them. And that could be us actually going out and having conversations, or we have regular conversations with people across the business anyway. So it could be just picked up through those. But we do a monthly engagement survey as well. So we pulse, well, actually we're moving to 6 weekly, but we do pulse surveys throughout the year. And that is a really useful tool for us to see, are we working on the right things? Or are we prioritizing the right things based on what our colleagues are saying? And it's also a useful tool to be like, are we doing it in the right way? Do we need to course correct? Maybe we're not focusing quite in the right area. We need to tweak things. So I'd say it's, in answer to your question, it's what's the strategic priorities of the business and how can we support them? But then also, what do we need to do from a colleague point of view? What are we seeing and hearing from what's happening in the lives of our colleagues that kind of helps us drive what we prioritize?
Yeah, I always, weirdly, because I run a technology company, I always put it into what are your prioritization drivers? Like, how do you populate your backlog? I don't know why, but that's how my head just runs. Is okay, well, you've got like continuous monitoring then with your employee engagement survey, so you can always get a flavor for what's happened and what's changed. You
Yeah.
have other series of metrics and listening opportunities from the business to say, hey, we need to change direction here because we're seeing underperformance, or there's a headwind from the market and therefore we need to think about this. And then you get to the point where you go, okay, now we're going to prioritize this item. Then what happens? Like, how do you make sure change does land and sustain?
I mean, that's a really hard question, one that should be really easy to answer given that it's my life. But the key thing for me on any sort of change project that I work on is really being clear on why we're making that change, and that as an organization, why we're making the change, but for the individuals that we're taking on the journey. So like the teams, it's translating that why to them specifically. And so that's really comes down to knowing your stakeholders and building great relationships with your stakeholders so that you can start to be like, okay, well, like work through that, what's in it for me for each of those different teams. And then you can define your sort of change interventions based on the needs of those particular teams or the individuals within those teams, and tailor your approach to them, because there's never going to be a one size fits all approach to change that really makes it stick. So that's, I guess, the key thing that I do on any change. The first thing I do is being really clear on why we're actually doing that. And then the second thing that I do, and I think is really important, it probably goes back to why we do the regular engagement surveys, but having a feedback mechanism is also really important for making change stick. And part of that is because obviously you want people to feel like they have a say in what you're doing. If people feel like they have a say, they're more likely to adopt the new way of working or to make sure the change sticks. But also I feel it's important to make, like, we don't always get things right. And so it's a good and useful mechanism to be like, okay, we've tried this thing. Maybe we actually need to tweak our approach here because we're not actually landing the change in the way that we need to, or it's not quite working for people. So in order for it to stick, we need to change it. We need to change. So yeah, those are I guess the two things that I really focus on doing. And yeah, just to make sure it
Yeah.
works. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. That makes absolute sense. And then you've partly answered this with the last response, but when you think about a high performance culture and what it means to you, like, how do you know you're moving in that direction?
Yeah. So when we think about a high performance culture, we use the sort of high support, high challenge, or high challenge, high support
Okay.
model.
Yeah.
And so for us, that means challenging colleagues, challenging what's possible and what they're delivering and what they're doing. And that's not only from meeting their objectives, but also when you think about your own personal development and growth. To be a high performer, you need to be continuously learning and focusing on how you can develop in your role. So from a high challenge, that's what we mean. And then from a high support, it's really around basically what it says on the tin, how are we supporting colleagues and actually to do that.
Yeah.
And that is definitely through strong leadership, through coaching, through feedback, all those different things that we have in place. And so then I guess when you take a step back and you say, okay, well, are we actually driving through that high support, high challenge model? Are we actually driving a high performance culture? And I'd say you'd look at things like, well, are there more high potential colleagues coming through your development pipeline? Are we seeing lots of creativity and innovation in the work that we're doing? Are our results more sustainable? Hopefully the answer to those questions is yes. And so we look at those things to say, is the high performing culture that we're trying to drive landing? And yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then when you think about maybe your most successful or most transformative project, what do you think it was and why do you think it was so successful?
Yeah, it's a bit of a broken record, but the values. So we actually did a refresh of our values a few years ago, and it was a pretty simple project actually. But from a change point of view, I think it's the one that's landed or come through quite well, and it's probably the reason I can point to your original question when you
Yeah.
asked about our culture. Is probably the reason I can point to the values through that. And literally all we did is worked with leaders across the business and got them to. We gave them some tools, obviously, to communicate what the changes were and what our values are, but then also some tools for them to help them take that and translate it for their teams and think, well, how can I bring those to life for me in the work that I do? What does it specifically mean for me? And so I think that's probably the one that I can point to the most, because then it trickles down through a whole bunch of other work that we do within the business.
Yeah, I guess the values are pretty systemic, right? There should be felt in every interaction in everything that you do, because they're drivers to intended employee experience and the key behaviors that you need. So that makes sense. Let's just spend some more time then on the values project, if that's cool, and just talk a little bit about the hurdles. Very often there's friction to change, right? And it would be useful to just explore any that felt really significant or maybe an unexpected obstacle that you came across and how you managed to overcome that in the values project.
Yeah, I don't know if this is probably less an unexpected obstacle and more a significant challenge. And that goes back to, I guess, the pace of change and just the level of change that's happening at any one time. Because whenever I'm working on a project in the business, it's never the only thing that's happening.
Of course, yeah.
And that's just from a project or transformation point of view. There's always quite a few different projects and things that are running, but there's also just the BAU work that has to be done, and that ebbs and flows throughout the year, obviously, depending on what month it is, if it's Christmas or whatever's going on.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest and so most significant challenge on any change, and in particular that one as well, is just the pace of it and getting the time and energy from the right stakeholders in order to land it. And also, I think colleagues obviously have high expectations, and they rightly should have high expectations of a workplace. And so for us, it's a balance of, let's do these initiatives that drive the great work that we do, but also let's keep a focus on well-being and recognition and that high support side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's, you didn't ask that, but how you start to
No,
overcome
it's how you mitigate it. No, that it completely makes sense. I think otherwise you just risk burnout, right? Because if you're driving a high change environment and then you're in a position in which you just keep pushing, because either you're not prioritizing effectively enough about what really does drive the most amount of impact, and therefore are just pushing more onto your people. If
Yeah.
there's not the resilience or the energy levels, the likelihood of it landing and sticking is much, much lower, right? So it
Yeah.
definitely makes sense. The other thing that I always find is repetition really does count, because people forget, because of all of these other pools of business as usual and other projects that are on, right, the way back to that. Why are we doing it? Like, how is it going to impact you? How's it going to make life better? All of that stuff. It
Yeah.
it can often feel like it's a little bit like what you said with the values response. It's like repetition is key because that's how it sticks and how it lands and how
Yeah.
people maintain context and connection to other stuff and so on.
Yeah, and there's something about doing that in a way that isn't just annoying for people. Like,
Spoony.
yeah, or yeah, forcing people to be like, we're all bought into this big thing. And I really love little nudges. And even if it's just, I don't know, we have screens in our office to do communication stuff, it could just be an interesting image that sparks someone to think, actually, I've got to go back and do this thing. Or
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be like these continuous messaging, it doesn't have to be like a meeting all the time, or these big things that can just be small nudges, either through communication or through other different processes and stuff that you have that you put in place to encourage the right actions or behaviors or whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to change it up a little bit to around the actual mechanics of driving change, if that's okay. So, when you think about your approach to embedding change so it sticks with this limited bandwidth, because there's lots of other people focused on a gazillion other things, like, have you got any tips or tricks even that would help people that are thinking about doing a similar thing be like, okay, this is how it's going to stick?
It's difficult because I think it goes back to what I was saying before about getting to know your why and the individuals that are like working on your change, and making it stick is going to be so specific to the group that you're working on, what their past history of change is, what their experience of that kind of, are they bought into it? Are they not quite, like, where are they like on their change journey? And it's a hard one to be like lift and shift, do this exactly the same thing. But
Yeah.
I think I'd go back to exactly that around the why and connecting into those particular people. But I think also leadership is so important in that too. If your leaders aren't bought in and they're not encouraging the change to stick, then it's probably not going to land. And so one of the things that I always try to do is really connect in with the leadership team, make sure that they're bringing it up through their conversations and that they have solid relationships with the teams that are needing to land the change. Because without that, your change isn't going to stick at all if you don't have strong leadership in that area. And yeah, I'd say know your why, know your people, and work with your leaders are probably like the key things.
Perfect. Yeah, I had written down meet people where they're at, be clear on your why, and then gain champions for change in your
Yeah,
managers is basically the same top
yeah.
three takeaways. Cool.
There also is something actually in Champions for Change in people that are a little bit more change resistant. Like sometimes I actually find if you find someone that's a little bit more maybe in a negative headspace or whatever, there's a reason for that. And so understand that reason. And often if you can get them brought into the change, they then can become your biggest advocates. So actually look for that pockets of resistance and see if you can actually tap into it for positive outcomes as opposed to just having to fight or combat it the whole time. And that doesn't have to be a leader, that can be anyone in the team. Could be someone
Yeah.
that's been in the business for a long time and they're just really used to working, and there's maybe some fear there around losing the knowledge and skills that they have around what they currently do, and that's where the resistance is coming from. But if you can tap into that, it can be such a game changer as well.
Yes. Yeah. It's true. It's almost like a creative thinking task. When someone
Yeah.
says to you, like, how would Superman solve this problem? And it's like, okay, well, now me in this negative mindset is expected to be a change champion. And like,
Yeah.
how does that person act? What does that person do? And it just encourages them to think outside the box, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't always work, but I'd give it a go.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it's worth throwing anything you can at it.
Yeah.
One of the threads that we've talked about is how technology can help and support. And you've obviously worked across IT and in people. And these functions often can feel like they're at opposite ends of the table rather than on the same side, looking at the same whiteboard, trying to solve the same problems.
Yeah.
But are there any bits of advice or how ways that you think that those two functions can work better together to ensure that they drive lasting cultural change?
Yeah, there's so many opportunities for the two functions to work together, particularly because there's not a lot of work that we do now that doesn't involve technology in some way, shape, or form. And then obviously your culture and people underpin everything that you do. And so there's huge amounts of crossover. I think part of it is aligning your cultural goals with the technology and stuff that you're using to make sure that they're enablers. But from a like actually working together, it's leveraging the skill sets that you have in each team. So if I think about some stuff that we're doing at the moment internally, we're thinking about how everyone, we probably can't get through any conversation without talking about AI, but we're talking about how we can leverage AI within our business. And obviously, there are loads of things that IT can do to land that, and they should definitely be like driving the change and being the experts in that space. But from a people team point of view, there's lots that we can do to support that. And so what we can do is help shape potentially like what's a learning pathway look like? How does development around that look? How can we do communication? What I was saying before on nudges and stuff. How can we bring like little nudges in to get people past that bit of fear to actually get in and give it a go? And so that's a really good example of where we can work together to lean into the skill sets that each of the different departments have to change our ways of working and really encourage people to do things slightly differently. So there's loads of potential for the teams to work together. And I think it's probably going to happen more and more and as we kind of progress because of the way that we work.
Yeah, I said right at the beginning that I think the combination of your background might or is likely to be right on point for the future of work. So in the press quite often at the minute, I've been seeing the combination of the HR or people leader with the IT director role, with a
Yeah.
view that the future of work has a combination of agent-led teams or agent-driven teams and people-driven teams. For that to work, do you think that there is a formula or a mindset or a way of thinking that would unlock a superior level of success? Or is it in your mind, it's just another change? It's just another thing to manage and roll with?
Yeah, I don't know specifically about the combined roles, but I think in terms of just the future of work and how things are changing so rapidly now, this is probably an obvious answer from me, but having a change mindset is going to be super, super important and just building resilience and curiosity. So that type of thinking is going to be so super, super important. I was watching a webinar recently by ProSci who do loads of research around change management. And they were saying in that AI learning that you do today is going to be out of date within 3 to 4 months. And so in order to actually just stay up to speed with what's happening and the pace of change that's happening with technology, but also just in the workplace, like having a change mindset and being able to embrace that thinking and just, yeah, continuous change, being able to adapt to new situations, new challenges, new ideas, even new tools is going to be super key rather than resisting them. But actually, a lot of what we're going to have to do is just make sure that people have the right mindset to just continuously learn and continuously adapt, just in order to keep up.
It feels like
Hopefully, question.
it, yeah, it does absolutely. It makes me think of like that age old saying of be the change that you want to see.
Yeah,
Like it feels like it's standing the test of time insofar as in order to sustain, you almost have to live it. Because
yeah,
I've done a whole host of playing with AI and I'm now trying to drive more and more agent activity. And I feel one, old sometimes, and
yeah,
two, there is so much opportunity, but the realization of opportunity requires energy and focus, which means you need to consciously and continuously break your own inertia because you
yeah,
do the things that you've always done in the way that you've always done them. And it's a brain shortcut, right?
yeah.
And therefore unlearning and then relearning the things that you really need to do to level up capabilities it's an interesting mindset transition that we're all learning as we go.
100%. And I think for me personally, it's been quite funny because it's almost a test of how well I manage my own change within myself. Because it's like I'm so used to working in environments that are changing constantly, but this is something different, I think, what most people have dealt with, even us personally. I think we're all going on this individual journey. And it's interesting for me personally because it's like, how am I thinking about this change for myself? But then also staying up to speed and thinking, what do I actually have to do to keep up? Yeah. So it's very scary, but it's also fun. I think there's, yeah, just so many opportunities. It's interesting to see where it's going to take us.
Indeed. The prioritization, it comes back to that same root point, right? Of what are your information sources in which allow you to understand the opportunity. And then it probably should, I challenge my team to say, I don't really want to hire if we're in a position where AI can do the job.
Yeah.
So how can we start to have maybe mantras or values around the organization that start to challenge thinking, that force, like your values program has been really successful. How do you start to just stimulate that thinking so that the default question people ask themselves is, okay, well, how could AI help do this or solve this problem or do whatever it might be? It becomes more systemic in the way that you talk to your values than AI as this amorphous, unclear thing that nobody really quite knows how to leverage in its
Yeah.
fullest sense. Right, I'm going to flip the script a little bit and talk about measuring impact. We've talked a lot about how you set the destination for where you want to go, how you think about change along the way, how you prioritize, how now I'm going to root us back to often the why component, like how do you actually know and understand that it was worthwhile? And
Mhm.
that normally comes through measuring impact. Because you've talked a little bit about values and you've talked a bit about Mo and your recognition program, I'm going to be selfish for this one, if that's all right, and ask if you have done any work linking usage stats from Mo, which is quite behavioral in data, to your engagement results. And if you've learned anything or if there's any insights that are worth remarking.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I mentioned earlier we run monthly pulse surveys with engagement, so we can quite easily see the impact on engagement. And we have it, so we look at the 14 different drivers of engagement within our survey, and one of those drivers is recognition. So we can specifically call out that score and see, has it changed since we implemented Mo? Great news, it has. So we implemented Mo, I think, towards the end of 2023. And obviously the score for that recognition driver, but also for engagement and as a whole, fluctuates quite a lot month by month because there's so many different things that can be impacting it. But overall, we can see that driver has increased since we first launched Mo. I don't know the actual percentage, but it's gone up from something like 7.5 to 7.8. So overall, it's moving in a positive way. We had some recognition processes in place before we used Mo, but they're a little bit all over the place. It wasn't in one dedicated platform. And so we are now able to kind of celebrate the small day-to-day wins, but also the bigger pieces of work that colleagues do to really raise the bar. And I think the insight we've gained from that is that just having one dedicated tool or a space to be able to bring that to life for colleagues and do recognition is really, really helpful. And it starts to obviously translate through to the engagement driver, but it also starts to help people just know that they're doing a good job and they can start to feel like more confident in the work that they're doing and just feel good about the work that they're doing as well. So I think the biggest insight is just having that one space that people can go to, and we can obviously bring it to life through outside of the platform as well. Like we have integration with Slack and different things like that where it comes through as well. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest insight is just having space to do it
No,
in
that
a really
that makes
interactive
sense.
way. Yeah.
Because the consequence of that is that you start to get the data, then you can know and understand how the numbers are moving and whether that correlates or it doesn't. And clearly, in this case, it does, which is great. It would be so we often would talk to customers about some of what you've said, monitoring frameworks, targeted change interventions based upon what the data is telling you. So on Mo, you can see where usage is really good, where it's really poor, where it's mediocre. And on your engagement platform with your survey data, you can do the same. So you can
Yeah.
see where engagement is good, where it's not, based upon a whole host of different kind of segmentation criteria. Have you been able to dig into any of that and the behaviors where recognition is really well embraced show a kind of disproportionate level of impact on engagement or not?
Yeah, again, this is quite a tricky one because there's so many different things that can be impacting engagements. But I think anecdotally, yes, you can generally see the teams that really embrace recognition through Mo or through other routes as well tend to be more engaged and just excited and animated at work. And on the flip side of that, we can start to see where teams aren't embracing. So the managers are less likely to give reward to their colleagues or nominate. They are less engaged. And actually, through our engagement platform, we can track things like key terms and different things that people are saying. And so Mo does come up, and generally where you have a more positive score against Mo as a term is where we can see teams are really actively engaged in the platform. Where it's coming up against a more negative score or a more passive score is often in teams that are like asking for more recognition, and they can see in this area, like this team is always getting called out. We do recognition as a whole for an organization is something that we embrace quite a lot. So we have a monthly huddle with our leadership team and we bring Mo to that. And so we talk about Mo's and stuff that have been shared. We have Mo as a widget on our homepage and our intranet. So like people can see it even if they're not going into the platform. And because of that, if I'm sitting in a team where potentially we're not focusing on recognition very much, it starts to become quite obvious.
Mm.
and people start to feel quite, I don't know, disconnected or not as engaged. So we definitely can start to see it through different routes, that people that use it more notice it, and people that don't, or teams that don't use it, also notice it, and they can feel the difference. But I think part of the benefit of that, because it's so visible, is that it's a really easy win to turn it around, because you can look at, okay, well, we're starting to see engagement is maybe dipping in this area, and we can also see your team isn't, line managers in your team aren't necessarily using the platform as much as others are, and we can use that as a, okay, let's now work with you on what your action plan is around engagement, and how can we start to shift these metrics and see if it has a result on overall engagement. So long-winded way of saying, like, yes, you can see the difference in teams, but sometimes it's like you have to do a little bit of digging to understand like what that actually is or where it's coming from.
Yeah, nice. Okay, that makes sense. Right, we are now at that stage where we're getting to the end. And with that means there's a question from a past guest and there is a lightning round. Let's go with a question from the past guest first, if that is okay.
Sure.
Which is, what's the one practice or mindset shift that you needed to make in order to become a top workplace?
It's probably because I do communication so much in my role, but I think prioritizing and fostering a culture of open communication is really important. And it's important to obviously keep people connected to what's happening in the business, whether that's the good stuff or the more challenging things that are happening. Being open and honest about those things is super important. But I think I've also spoken loads about how it's not just like one way communication. It's not just like us telling colleagues what's going on. It's also creating opportunities for colleagues to like talk to us as well, and whether that's through the engagement platform, but also we are big users of Slack, and so we have loads of open communication forums in there. We have a leadership Ask Me Anything channel where people can go in and ask our leaders questions, and they do, because we have got an environment where people feel safe enough to speak up, and that's really great. So I think definitely prioritize that open communication.
And I guess that is for the benefit of transparency and then in turn trust ultimately.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. Perfect. Lightning round. Are you ready?
Ready.
One tech tool that you can't live without.
I say no. No,
Yeah, you
no,
have to. No, I'm joking. Go on.
I actually think I love Slack as a communication tool. I think it's just, and it also just bring a whole bunch of tools together in one place. So I'd say Slack.
Yeah, cool. The moment that you look at as the most proud or the most joyful from your career.
Yeah. Probably as one of recognition, but it was not long after I became a manager, someone left a sticky note on my computer about, I don't know, no, I have no idea what it was that I did, but I'd helped them with something. And it was just the most meaningful sticky note. And I still remember it, and it still makes me happy today when I think about it. So obviously shows the importance of recognition, because I'm still
Indeed.
right now. That's a minor one, but it was big. Yeah.
Love that. A thinker, author, or a book that has influenced your approach to organizational culture.
I don't know if it's quite organizational culture, but I really love anything that Adam Grant does. I think he's just, so interesting.
Yeah, indeed. I've got a couple of his little books in there.
Yeah.
A culture trend that you're most excited about right now.
I think just the focus on the whole employee experience, not just a once in a year engagement survey or whatever, is having those different touch points and really thinking about the whole picture for colleagues.
Yeah, love that. And then the last one is, you don't know who the next guest is going to be, but what's the one question that you would love for them to answer when it comes to driving culture change?
We are big foodies in Ocado. Like, obviously, we are a food business. So I'm just going to base my question on that. So if you were thinking about culture change as a recipe, what's the single most important ingredient, and one that's potentially often overlooked? What is the secret sauce for culture change?
That's a great question. That is a really good question.
Because I could not tell you what one thing is, but hopefully the next guest can.
Let's see. No pressure. Charlotte, thank you ever so much. This has been really fun. It's been lovely to spend some more time with you and hear about the elements of good with Mo, but mostly about your career and the significant amount of change that you've helped make happen and the impact of that. So well done to you. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again soon.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
If you found today's conversation valuable, we'd love if you follow us, rate us, or review the show. It really helps others find us. And if you're feeling inspired, share this episode with someone who's passionate about building a better workplace. We'll be back soon with more stories from people leaders putting culture into action. See you again next time.